All right, gang, over the course of this chapter, we're going to assemble a single project. We're going to take a couple of files that are found inside of the 20 text shapes folder, and we'll start with this guy, baselayers.psd. That represents the base elements that we'll be building up, and we will ultimately craft this final document called poutmagazine.psd. And my intention here is that we're seeing all the best stuff that Photoshop has to offer where text and shapes are concerned. So we have a couple of very interesting shape layers going on. We also have all varieties of text at our disposal here. We've got point text, that is text on a single line emanating from a specific point, and we'll see what that looks like. We've got area text inside of a rectangular text block. We've got text inside of a custom shape. We've got text on a path, as witnessed by September 2026. We have all sorts of layer effects going on, most notably some drop shadows, but more than that as well. And then we even have text and shapes inside of a pixel-based mask. Now, the reason all of this stuff is very interesting is because when you're working with live editable text and or vector-based shapes inside of Photoshop, you are temporarily removing yourself from the world of pixel-based image resolution. You are now working with resolution-independent layers, which means, among other things, that you can scale those layers, editable text layers, vector-based shape layers, to any size you want, and they will always render out at the full resolution of your image. Not only that, if you're working with a PostScript-based printer or you're submitting your file for commercial reproduction, then your text layers and your shape layers will output at the full resolution of that PostScript output device, which means that you can go ahead and lay out things like magazine covers entirely in Photoshop. There's not really any reason to bring them into Illustrator or InDesign or some other program and create the text there. In fact, there's a lot of reason to stay right inside Photoshop, where you have access to the best of both worlds. You've got PostScript savvy text and shape layers, and you also have access to true bona fide layer effects, which comes off as something of a compromise inside of Illustrator and InDesign. And you also have pixel-based alpha channels, layer masks, that kind of thing. And we'll see what all of that means over the course of this project. Anyway, I'm going to switch back to this guy, baselayers.psd. And incidentally, if you're opening these files, with any luck, you should have these fonts, because there's a lot of different ways to buy these CS5 applications. And every one of them comes with a different group of fonts. But so far as I can tell, every one of these batches of fonts includes Minion Pro and Myriad Pro, which we will be using to build up this entire project. So you shouldn't get any font warnings with any luck. If you do, you'll just have to open your files and use alternative fonts. Now, this baselayers.psd file actually has some guidelines associated with it. Right now, I've hidden the guidelines. I'd like you to make sure that you're seeing them at this point by going to the View menu, choosing Show, and make sure that Guides has a check mark in front of it. If it doesn't, choose that command, or you can press Control semicolon, Command semicolon on the Mac, and you'll see a series of guides. At first, they may be a little confusing because there's a fair number of them, but they'll all prove very useful for alignment purposes. Now, the next thing I want you to do is check out the type tool right here. By default, you're going to see the horizontal type tool, assuming that you're working in the Western world. So here in the States, Europe, and so on. And in fact, if you loaded D keys, I've made the decision that this is the one and only type tool that you're going to need. So rather than the T key cycling you between the various alternatives, I've set things so the T key gets you the horizontal type tool and only the horizontal type tool. Now, if you're working in the Asian world or with Asian type primarily, then you may want to go ahead and modify your keyboard shortcut so T gets you the vertical type tool only. The thing I'd like you to avoid is cycling between the horizontal type mask tool or the vertical type mask tool, because you really don't need them. They allow you to create selection outlines in the shape of characters of type. So you could use big text, for example, to select portions of an image and bring them into a different composition, for example. And that may sound great, but bear in mind that you can do that anyway using live type. So, for example, if I was to switch over to poutmagazine.psd right here, and I was to expand open this folder right there, 365 elements, I'll go ahead and twirl it open. And inside at the bottom, there's this layer called 365, and that's that 365 text right there. And notice that it's a live editable text layer because we're seeing a big T for the thumbnail. If you press the Control key or the Command key on the Mac and click on that thumbnail, then you convert the text into a selection outline, and then you could switch to the marquee tool right here, and I could go ahead and switch to the base photograph. And I should mention, by the way, that this photograph comes to us from Andre Pijas of the Fotolia image library. And I'm going to go ahead and control drag or command drag that selection in order to move that text, which is now filled with pixels, around. However, once again, this selection outline that just happens to look like a 3 followed by a 6 followed by a 5 is not editable type, so I can't switch them to different numbers or letters or what have you. I can't edit it, and I can't change the formatting and all that jazz. However, I can go back to this 365 text layer and modify it and lift a new selection outline from it. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and undo that modification by pressing the F12 key, just to go ahead and revert that document to its original appearance. And then I'm going to switch back to baselayers.psd. And now I'm going to go ahead and switch to the type tool either by clicking on its icon or pressing the T key. And we are now ready to create text inside of our base document, just as we will in the next exercise.